Welcome, everybody, to another Perceptive Podcast here on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. We have a great chat lined up today. We're going to be discussing open world and environmental design. My guest is a returning one. He is a game designer who specializes in environmental design, urban city design, and he is also the author of Virtual Cities, an Atlas and Exploration of Video Game Cities. So please welcome back to the chat, Konstantinos. How are you doing?
Lovely, and thanks for having me back again, Josh. It's always fantastic to chat with you, and hopefully people will find our arcane mutterings interesting enough and intriguing enough, hopefully.
We shall certainly see. Or to anyone watching this recorded, thank you for stopping by. And hello, Farmer. Thanks for coming on as well. So it has certainly been a while since we last spoke. So for people who missed that last chat or don't know who you are, could you kind of give like the brief PR speak about who you are and what is your background?
Right. So my background is in urbanism. My PhD is a metropolitan phenomenon, actually. But for the past over 10 years, I've been working exclusively in games. I'm mostly a game urbanist. That is, I try to design and tackle the urban environments of games in all their forms and functions. And I'm also a game designer, an educator, and level designer, and occasional author too. So I wear a lot of hats and a variety of things. But my main focus would have to be, the cities of gaming, game cities and virtual cities, in all their forms and seen through a variety of lenses. Let's say.
And for people who haven't looked at your book, what is Virtual Cities about?
Well, it's sort of a celebration and an attempt to entice people to visit several of the most interesting and perhaps fascinating cities that gaming has to offer. It's sort of there are like 50 cities that are all described from an in-universe perspective, as a traveler, perhaps as a first exploration, and they're illustrated by a friend, Maria Kalikaki, and also I try to add a few hints regarding the design processes and the successes and perhaps a few of the failures of said cities. So it's a book aimed mostly at people who enjoy the worlds of gaming, but that also has something to offer to people who design games and their levels and their worlds. So I think the balance is almost there. It got close. Maybe I don't know. could be improved upon at some point.
And like looking at like how you describe the book, it reminds me a lot when I was younger. Like I always loved to like draw like game maps and like do stuff like that. Just like try to build that sense of space around like the various environments. And
exactly.
It's such a, again, like, I know from our last chat, it's such a fascinating conversation to talk about kind of like building that sense of space in a video game. And I think, like, for developers watching, or even like new timers watching us live record it, I do feel like it's a lot harder than it sounds to build like an environment that makes sense in a game. Because we've seen in a lot of games, like, they tend to go one of two ways. Either it is, it's a hospital with 47 different stairwells and corridors, like it looks like a Doom map, or they try to go like so realistic or so, sterile that it doesn't feel like a place that's worth exploring.
True, absolutely. I think you put it perfectly. You summed up the situation. There are two extremes that we'd rather avoid. I mean, first of all, we have spaces that are far too gamey. I mean, they say adhere to the fundamentals of level design theory. For example, in FPS, they would block line of sight and they would, have some verticality, but they simply are some sort of exercise of level design theories in space, and this is just something that feels too gamey, feels too wrong. And then you have non-abstracted realism that, again, is a bit dull. And again, the fact that we have something realistic and something that makes sense does not mean that we have something memorable. The point is to create something that is interesting, that is fun to play in, and that is not actually realistic by itself, but more of a place that offers an illusion of realism. And the thing about spaces is that we all tend to discuss and try to see how we can accomplish immersion. And immersion is a very, very spatial thing. It's effectively the sense of being someplace else. And in order to be there, you will have to have this dynamic, convincing, interesting, and when something is interesting, it actually makes you want to suspend your disbelief even further. It makes you want to engage with this place. So you have to make it interesting, not just realistic. I can think of a billion realistic, but completely, dull and cookie cutter places in the actual world. We don't want that. We want it to be convincing and interesting and fascinating, but also a space, so because you're going to be in there, virtually.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say the idea is that obviously we have to serve gameplay with our spaces and levels and worlds and cities and open worlds perhaps, but we also have to convey this illusion of a cohesive world within its its narrative demands and everything.
Mm-hmm. I guess that takes me to an interesting question for you. In terms of, one second, I can see I see my OBS is acting up for some reason. Hopefully it's not going to screw things too far up. Okay. I wonder if it's either YouTube or Comcast being crazy today. It seems like perfect timing. But the question I have for you then, with regards to making the environment interesting or making it something that the player is worth exploring, for a lot of games, when we look at things from a design perspective, I think a lot of designers focus on the movement or the physicality of the player first, or the mechanics. Hi, Rat's Tail in chat. I would say one of the examples we always talk about here would be the Mario games. Mario is a game that is very mechanic or movement tech first, and the environmental design feels more like a second or third. It's still very interesting, but it feels like the environment, I guess, is in service of the player, as opposed to the player being in service of the environment. And what I want to ask you about is, when we see, or from examples that you've looked at, what are some good ones of kind of I guess the environment stepping out of the shadows of the gameplay? Some place that is just, even if the player can't even, jump on rooftops or, triple jump or web swing around, it's a world that's worth exploring, in your opinion.
Well, yes, I have to agree with you that environments in Mario games, especially due to the fact that the games themselves are a very unique kind of abstraction of reality and a very cartoony take on world design. So this allows and enforces you to take a very different approach. But let's say games where spaces really matter, where spaces really become an important character in the game, would obviously have to be, first of all, let's say the open world games as a category. The fact that you have this vast geographical space, but with it a vast possibility space. What an open world game, for example, does is promise you that you can effectively do anything within it. Anything you can imagine, given the verbs that the game provides you with, you can feel as if you can try it out. You can play with the world itself, and those games, by definition, effectively need to be grounded in very interesting and well made places. But you also have games where actually navigating space is a key gameplay requirement. They do not have to be open world, but usually, I mean, they tend to be. But this effectiveness of navigation and this discovery and iteration and improvement upon a spatial movement pattern, those games are the games that force their environments and worlds and level geometries to come forward and actually be a huge part of the game. Again, I mean, if we want to discuss Nintendo, I mean, Breath of the Wild is a very special game. Is a game that really draws you in with its amazing world, and you want to explore it, and you're not bored when exploring it. I mean, you might not have something that is very typically defined as gameplay, and many game designers will tell you that, for example, walking, and I would say that perhaps they would also mean riding, is not exactly gameplay. And yet, when you're doing this, when you're having this interactive exploration of a virtual space in Breath of the Wild, you feel intrigued. You feel occasionally happy or scared or whatever the world designers want you to feel, and you're actually entertaining yourself and enjoying this experience mainly by enjoying its world.
I mean, I think that's a really good point with Breath of the Wild, that it really feels like, for people like watching this, like, it is Nintendo's first like actual like open world action adventure game, and it feels like something like they've done like a million times before. And that's always been, I think, one of Nintendo's like very subtle talents when it comes to the games they make, that whatever they make as like their first attempt feels like something they've made, 5-10 times over. And
True. This is very impressive, but I mean, they definitely are Nintendo after all.
Yeah.
I'm certain that they keep eyes and they analyze and test and prototype a ton of things before actually doing something.
Mm-hmm. And for, I think, a lot of developers out there, they tend to, I think, mess up when it comes to like making that space, I think, interesting. Like, as you said, like, if you're playing a game like Breath of the Wild, you can entertain yourself just by going to like the highest mountain or tree and then, gliding off into the horizon, or going to fight one of the bosses, or going on all the massive shrine quests. But one thing I wanted to get your thoughts on, because this is something that I see from a lot of indie and maybe even sometimes like AA developers who tend to either go for like an open world or a wide environment, is that I see these massive spaces and there's nothing. There is just absolutely nothing worth exploring, nothing to go off the beaten path. It feels, again, like that case of, we have point A and point B. Let's stretch this out as far as humanly possible. And that's it. And I just find this, like, from a player perspective, just very frustrating. That it feels like it's a 5-minute jaunt that's been pushed to, like, a 30-minute slow walk from different points.
Yeah, I completely get you. And I think that this is something that happens mostly because someone wants to tick the marketing box that this is indeed another open world, due to the perception that open worlds sell more. The thing is that not every game needs to be an open world. I mean, if we took brilliant games like Dishonored or like Half-Life 2 or whatever, but especially Dishonored, which could have easily been an open world, and try to imagine it as an open world game, I think we could be certain that it would be a worse game, that it would be a less interesting world. You wouldn't have the curation that you right now have, and it just moves you around, from point within an implied space to another point within the same implied space, and each and every one of those points is a fantastically designed, very, very detailed, very, very well thought out and narratively important place that you go and play and explore and do everything. And if you fill in the blanks with dull stuff, you don't really add anything to the experience. You just momentarily suggest the fact that you might be able to do all sorts of things which probably do not matter. So not all games have to be open worlds, but when you decide to make an open world, you have to first of all think, I would say, of the mechanical bits. I mean, how do you make the traversal of this particular space interesting? Do you have options? Do you have you thought of ways that will provide your players, say, with interesting views, how to help them navigate the place and not feel lost, and just stick their eyes on the little mini map box at the lower right hand of the screen. You have to make traversal interesting. Then you have this narratively fertile place that will help your level designers, and quest designers fill it with interesting stuff from a plot point of view, and then you'll have to make certain it's beautiful, and you'll have to make certain it's cohesive, and then maybe change things up a bit, show people something unexpected, something odd, and then let them figure out why it is the way it is. I'm thinking a place like the Witcher 3 world, right? Which is large, which is vast. It never really feels empty. I mean, it guides you a bit too strongly, but there are defined places to visit. There are regions that make sense and are different from each other, and they have their own different type of stories to tell, and then different humans inhabiting them, and you have all those things that feel interesting, that are, I mean, okay, I don't want to sound heretical, but they sort of feel as like reading, I don't know, Tolkien again, and you move from place to place and you see different stuff, and those things click and they feel real and they feel different and not generic, and so that works. But this is mostly a writing job. But especially if we look at Witcher 3, we know, because I mean the team has gone and said so actually themselves, that they really put a lot of thought on how those things function. How do these societies work? Why is war happening? All those things they have the answers to, and that allowed them to have this very realistic world that maybe with a few exaggerations and an interesting fantasy setting could become something that would draw us in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just like having like those interesting landmarks, that idea that, hey, there's that, creepy looking cabin, 8 feet off the road. Maybe there's something there. Maybe there isn't. It's like just that idea of just like finding something out there. And it is a lot of work. I think let's not be around the bush. That making an open world game is very difficult when it comes to making it an interesting open world.
And it's very expensive too. And I mean, it's the same thing. I for some reason I think that it's a parallel problem. It's like with multiple endings. It's the same thing with open worlds. I mean, just like it's very difficult to actually come up with one good ending for any sort of story. Coming up with 10 is effectively impossible. And the same thing is like coming up with one interesting and complete, say, building within a place, or with a completely interesting and unique road in a city is difficult enough. Coming up with the whole thing is again effectively impossible. But then again, I mean, you mentioned it before, like this constant promise and those constant nudges towards exploration and these things. Those things can be supported by taking advantage of those very, very commonly understood spatial symbols. So I mean, if you see this beautiful winding path going into the forest, you'll probably want to go there and see what happens. If you see this dark cave, you'll probably be afraid and then prepare yourself for a monster or something, but still you'll want to there. So we have like those tropes of spatiality, let's say, that people sort of instantly recognize and they assign some sort of value or sentiment to. And we can perhaps play with those to say guide the spatial exploration experience for the players, and make them effectively feel and do the things we want them to do in perhaps in the order we would like them to.
Mm-hmm. So, I guess with that said, of like trying to get the player to do something, one of the things that, like, we spent the last few minutes on about games that are built very much on like the mechanical side of things. That idea that you can go and jump, swing, shoot, whatever you want in the space. But I want to get your thoughts on games that are more about, I would say, like narrative driven, the AKA the or quote unquote the walking simulators, because we've seen a lot of developers who try to tell that story in the environment, and it just ends up, I think, like falling flat in some places. Like the world, even though we're not supposed to be, jumping around, it still doesn't feel, I guess, like worth exploring. I want to see if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm not certain. I mean, I haven't really reached this definitive conclusion, at least for myself. But I have the sense that many of the walking simulators or the games that we consider that do not have enough gameplay, for the average, gamer, let's say. But I say that most walking simulators are not written well enough. They are too tropey, too generic, perhaps. I mean, they try to draw you in with their environments and story, but both their environments and story are, good, but that's it. So I mean, you do not have something spectacular, because if you effectively take away gameplay and just retain some rudimentary interactions, then the rest has to be stellar if you want to draw in people. And if you want it to be a worthwhile, time investment in something, because people do not have limitless time. I mean, right now, I demand that every developer sort of respects my time when I play their works. I don't want to feel that everything is padded out or anything. So when you want me to experience a story, make certain that this story, and do just that, make certain that this story is brilliant. Mm-hmm. If it's not brilliant, there's no reason perhaps to make the game. Turn it into something else. It's probably easier to turn your game into, I don't know, a simple puzzle game or a simple adventure-like experience than to be brave enough to turn it into a walking simulator. And also, when it comes to, say, something large enough to be an open world game, you would at least have to provide me with some sort of non-crucial activity within the game. I'm thinking, I mean, I did work on a game I really loved, which was called Lake by Gamies. It was released, I think, a couple of years ago, or somewhere there, like a year or a couple of years ago. And you effectively played a male woman in during the 80s in Midwestern, in Colorado, actually, somewhere, I think. And this was a game that was, in many ways, a walking simulator, and you didn't have too much challenge, but you had several choices to make, and you also had mail to deliver, and you had, a lot of exploration to do. And the fact that there wasn't much of a challenge didn't mean that there weren't stuff for you to play with and things to do. You have to have some sort of gameplay. This really helps you tell the story. It also helped a lot that the story was, very, very touching and very human and very relatable, especially for people working, in the wider, say, technological sector. So that's a way of doing things, perhaps. Or you could, I don't know, go the journey route and to have some stellar game design and, play with the way that people can non-verbally interact within a game and push them to be close to each other and this weird sense of sociability when they explore. I mean, there are countless ways, but you always have to have a reason to go for size, to have a reason to go for a large world. You have to know why this wouldn't work, in a curated space, and what would make your huge, desert worth exploring.
Mm-hmm. Not sure why you can't hear anything, Pulse. Is anyone else having that issue? You may have to refresh, because I'm not noticing anything weird on this side, at least about the audio. But yeah, you have to make it, I think, worth exploring. And this was something that I know we spoke about on our last chat, about kind of that environmental design.
Mm.
Earlier, you brought up Dishonored, and I mean, stuff like Arcane is really good at making these very, I guess, like very qualitative environments that they're not large in the sense that it takes you 30, 40 minutes, an hour to go from point A to point B in them, but they're just rich in terms of multiple paths, multiple ways to go. And that's when we get into kind of like the immersive sim territory, and that is its own just like huge challenge when it comes to some of these games.
Yeah, truth be said, this really goes down to world building and writing effectively. I mean, in Dishonored, you had this really well thought out world, and you had created the means that allowed your team to be creative because you had come up with this fairy tale environment that came with a bit of I mean, you had this economy, you had this everything centered around whale oil, and this thing leads to whale slicing factories that can be incredibly brutal, and they help you want to do something about it, and they also give this whole world of whole the very very distinct flavor. And then you had the specific politics of what's going on, and then you had the specific architecture of the place, and you had distinct architecture that was very legible, very very readable. I mean, when you saw this almost modernist stone building, you knew this would be an administrative or official building, and when you saw this like Victorian brickwork, you knew that this would be a standard working class building, and you knew what to expect from every place, judging it by its architecture, and by making the place both narrative heavy and legible, you really help players enjoy it more. And the same thing goes with I'm thinking again, not an open world game, but a vast supposedly city, Midgar from Final Fantasy VII. I mean, I haven't played the remake.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's far too many hours for me. But the original Final Fantasy VII, I mean, it gave you this incredibly legible city that made sense, that was narratively impressive. You had this huge landmark in the center, which was the Shinra Corporation headquarters, and then you had the saucer around it where the upper classes lived. I mean, literally above the poor. And this was organized like a pizza in 8 slices, very easy to remember, very easy to map in your mind. And below each pizza slice you had the respective slum, again very easy to understand. And you have like this very very defined, very easy to remember, and very interesting also visually structure in your head while you are engaging with the city on a neighborhood level. And the neighborhood level is the level in which we are more accustomed to actually operating in our civic lives in reality. I mean, the places in the city you live in are usually around the place you live, around the place you work, around the place you go out at nights, and around the place you take the kids to play. And they're always at the neighborhood level. You do not really have this sense of the details of whatever lies between those places. I mean, you may have driven past the same building a billion times, but you never really cared to find out who lives there or what they do there. And that's fine. And so, might have gotten carried off a bit. I think I may have answered what you said. I think I might have almost made a point
there. Yeah, about like trying to make like these cities feel very, I guess, deep or rich in terms of their layouts. Let's see. Yeah, and to Pulse's comment, like verticality in games is its own very unique challenge, and yeah, I agree that is like, oh, excuse me. I think this gets at kind of when we talk about cityscapes and this idea of exploring skyscrapers or towers. That I would love to see like more games take that approach, like Breath of the Wild. That again, like one of like the most beautiful things about that game was that you could just literally climb on anything. And again, it's an idea of giving the player like this really fun toy that they can use all around the place.
Again, yes, and again, it's about making traversal fun, making
Hmm.
moving around a joy in itself. It's again what Nintendo does. I mean, they make them the new Mario for their new game, and they play with it in an empty space just to see how the actual mechanic of moving around feels. And in an open world or in a civic open world environment, we really have to nail movement. And I would also add that we would have to make the choice of type of movement interesting, meaning that, oh look, it's cheaper and faster to take the subway, but it might be more dangerous, or it's flashier to get the car, but the police might get you. Whatever. You should also give players this decision to make, like which would be the preferable way of moving around right now. But when it comes to verticality, I would say that verticality is something that is very interesting, both when it comes to the buildings themselves. This environment they create around us, and verticality also allows you to create enclosure. I mean, this sense that you're actually in a city, and that there's like this actual, let's say, roughly type guideline when designing urban areas. You would say that a verticality where the ratio of building height to road width is between 1 and 2 to 1, like from either 1 to 1 or 2 to 1. That would be perfect. You wouldn't have like this sense of being, claustrophobic or anything, but you would feel enclosed, and then you would sort of tend to like this feeling. And yes, cities should have that, and verticality is something that helps with that. But verticality shouldn't be exclusive to buildings. I mean, if you look at some of the cities we consider really beautiful, you would see that they come with incredibly dramatic topographies themselves. I mean, if you look at Rio de Janeiro, if you look at Hong Kong, if you look at all those places, you'll see that the natural foundation on which they are based, and that initially defines their shape, is very interesting. I mean, you have hills, you have canals, you have a seafront, you have all this interesting topography and natural geography going on, and this really gives a lot of character and a lot of beauty to any city, and that really helps to create interesting environments. I mean, if you went to and games rarely take advantage of topography. I mean, I think that the main paradigm is like a city on the flatlands, like surrounded by fields, and everything is flat, and maybe there's a mountain in somewhere in the distance. Which is, yeah, I mean, I get why it's happening. It's much easier to design and conceptualize and even model, but it's way less interesting.
Hmm. And one thing I wanted to ask you about, I was thinking about some of the games I've played recently, and one of them was, I'm not sure if you've heard of this, I think it's called Neon White. And this was kind of like it's like a parkour base first person shooter. So it's like very technical movement based focus. It's all
Mm-hmm.
about how quickly you can move through the environment, get best times on each level, that kind of thing. And when I think a lot of us, and as we've been talking about designing interesting environments and the worlds, again, we always immediately go to the mechanical side. The idea of getting the player to move as quickly and as interesting from point A to point B as possible. But for people who are working on, again, something that is more narrative driven, something that isn't as mechanically based, I was wondering, do you have any tips or thoughts on what makes an interesting environment when the player can't be triple jumping around or wall jumping or, kind of exploring in that sense?
I would say that would have to be an environment that does either or both of the things. It's either very beautiful and very unique, and this is something that's interesting to look at, and especially if it comes with the details that will draw you in, and let you imagine what's going on. So yeah, how it looks and how dense it looks is always a factor. And then you have the what stories the environment tells. and they can be, you don't have to have a single layer of environmental storytelling. Effectively, you can have increasingly subtle layers, and layers that will become apparent perhaps later. You don't have to explain everything. And then again, I would say that you have environments that really help players feel the things we want them to when we want them to. And though we say that, look, the opening of Half-Life 2 is perfect, and the train station in City 17 is perfect. One of the reasons it's perfect is because it makes us dislike the place we are in and want to actually change that place towards something better. I mean, you exit the train, things are like really, really depressing. You have this big brother like figure talking to you. You have those like weird armored cops pushing you around. I mean, you don't exactly know what's going on, but you do know that you do not like this thing. And this is a quality we instinctively at that moment imagine that has to do with the environment itself, but it's the fact that the way the environment is structured helps us align our feelings with the feelings of the protagonist, of Freeman, and makes us want to do what the game actually allows us to do. So you cannot, I would say that it's very difficult to just have, a fantastic environment that would be fantastic regardless of game. It will have to be interesting, it will have to tell stories, it will have to imply this complexity that isn't there. I mean, you can have, instead of modeling toilets, you can just have, a door with a WC sign on it. And instead of, showing the extent of homelessness, you could just have a couple guys as a symbol of homelessness. Yes, symbolism works a lot. But all those things will only matter if they sort of make you feel what the designer wants you to feel and what the game allows you to act upon. So it's a bit like that, I imagine, in most cases. Again, it depends. You could see. I'm thinking that as a kid, I used to love Dragon Slayer, which was a horrible game. I mean, it was barely a game. But it was stunning, and it was stunning not only environmentally, but on animation and character movement and humor level too. Yeah, I mean, we tend to love things for all sorts of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
But,
So I am going to challenge you with this next question. What are your thoughts on Death Stranding? Because I know we didn't talk about this last time. I recently had a chance to play it. I think I want to say last year. I did not play the developers' cut or whatever it's called.
Oh, me neither.
And I don't know. Like, I found this game like both good and bad in a lot of respects in terms of how it was set up. And like there are some people who like they were talking about, oh, it gets amazing 10 to 12 hours in. And I was like, oh, why did you have to tell me that?
Yeah, no, it's weird. I mean, the first thing that really impressed me, I mean, as in really thoroughly impressed me, was the fact that movement and actually walking was turned into a gameplay mechanic that actually mattered, that was impressively well done. I mean, you had to think about how you walk, where you walk on, how you juggle the stuff you're carrying. This is fantastic. I mean, it's this thing that like walking itself is entertaining. Good. The world looked beautiful, definitely, but where the game actually lost me was in those, you know, typically long expositional dialogues that I do not really enjoy. I mean, really, I do not. Um, but the open world itself was, at certain points, wonderful and very clever in, incorporating this full multiplayer aspect where people could just live things around and people could sort of, indirectly communicate and shape their environment. It definitely looked good. It definitely allowed for different modes of traversal, but the overall game itself didn't really draw me in either. And I think I might be just I might just be unfair towards it. But still, I mean, both technically and design wise, the the world is impressive. It's impressive,
Mm-hmm.
and it has been, you know, very well gogged to fit in with the movement mechanics, which is absolutely something very important. I'd say that it's less interesting than say Dishonored or The Witcher or I don't know, Mafia 3. But that would have to do again with the fact that I really didn't care for the story much, probably.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. And with like the environmental design of Death Stranding, it had that again. Like it felt like it was both very wide, but at the same time was very narrow. That,
Mm.
and I said this in my review that I would love to see someone take like this kind of movement system and just like this exploration and put it in like a game like a Spin Tires or a Snow Runner, like that very like
Mm.
over over the top kind of simulation of like moving from point A to point B. And with
Mm.
Stranding, it had that same issue I mentioned earlier, that it felt like here's this giant world for you to explore. We only want you to focus on like this
Yeah.
specific line, and everything else is just there, just to be there, essentially.
Mm. Yeah, this sounds fair to me. This sounds like a fair assessment to me, honestly. But again, I think it's I don't know. Maybe we both missed some sort of point, and I think again that if it was, I mean, the same thing could be said for Brutal Legends World.
Mm.
But the fact that drove around in a completely silly car, listening to
Mhm.
fantastic music, suddenly made this thing incredibly entertaining. Or,
Mhm.
or I don't know, maybe the fact that at least I cared more about that plot and those characters, maybe that helped too. But again, I mean, what you're listening to is also very important when traversing empty spaces, uh, and it's or at least a gameplay empty spaces. I mean, Brutal Legend does that amazingly, but even GTA, which is rarely empty, realizes that you have to listen to something, and this is why we have those generally excellent radio stations.
Mhm. Anyone here
So
enjoyed a Vice City's soundtrack, by the
yes, yes,
way?
yes, yes. I think Vice City is my favorite GTA, easily, actually, easily, yeah, by far.
Mhm.
And I mean, it's very, and it's also very very educational. I mean, because you still have a very very limited selection of assets. Not you can just design, but you can actually render and stream. And the city is still tiny, and you can see this whole the fact that they've taken Miami and this fictionalized version of Miami, and they've really focused on what makes it unique and what makes it recognizable, and they exaggerated that, and they cut all the fat and everything that isn't completely integral to the image of the place, and you have this super condensed city that is simultaneously just big enough to feel city-like. That was a brilliant design, really.
Mhm.
Brilliant design.
Yeah, and to Thomas's comment, yeah, like a smaller world that's packed with more stuff. Like Yakuza
Yakuza.
games
Yeah,
are
yeah.
really well done.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. And they are, and they feel much larger than they are, exactly due to the fact that the detail that's poured into each location and the views you get even from the areas surrounding Kamurocho, they imply a much larger place than the one you get to visit. But everything you visit in Yakuza is interesting, is unique, is important, is lively. It's like this. I don't know if you remember Warren Spector's idea of the urban block game, which is
Mm.
this game he keeps mentioning he would love to make, and I would absolutely love to see. Where it's like we just take this single block and we simulate the hell out of it, and everything there is like super interconnected and very reactive and very dynamic. You have like this single place and everything happens there, and you have like this very still highly abstracted but very interesting and vibrant but albeit small place. So it's small. It's the fact that all games, even the biggest, richest, most popular games, they have a budget,
Mhm.
and you will have to spend that budget on a variety of things. So if you decide that you will have a larger world, it comes without question that this world will have to be more sparsely populated than a tiny world. So if you want to make a city specifically, and if you want to make a city that's not to be experienced through driving, you will have to cut down on it. Because when you drive by, you don't notice things.
Yeah.
But when you actually walk, you take, and the same applies in real life. That's why when you're a tourist, you don't drive around places, you walk around places. You want to take in the details. You want to understand what's going in this new place, and you want to enjoy everything. So when you make a game like Yakuza, it's completely wise to go very small and detailed instead of large and vague.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think sticking with Yakuza games for a second,
Mm.
I think like their kind of like goal or like what they achieve so well again is that you can actually learn how to move around that space without
Mm.
needing to use the map, and it
Yes.
kind of hammers home the major landmarks. And what was it Yakuza Zero? I think it was where you had like the area where there was like that giant bridge separate, or actually I think it was in like a dragon as well. You had like the two bridges like north and south that you kind of
Mm.
cross between each area.
True.
That it got to the point where I wouldn't know like where I was or what was going on based on excuse me the major landmarks. And
Mhm.
it's that kind of design that I think is very hard to do right in a lot of games about trying to
Mm.
get that create that memorable landmark that's not just there for a gameplay perspective. And what I mean by that is that we look at stuff like, if you remember, obviously with like Half-Life 2, Left 4 Dead, if you looked at like the developers' commentary, they talked about using lighting and the environment to kind of guide the player. Say, hey,
Mm.
we want you to go to this hospital because we have all the lights shining on it. We have, all the city block. But it's hard to do it when it's like, we want to make a memorable landmark just to fit in that city, and then the player can use it as a
Mm.
guidepost going forward.
True. True. This is the thing is that actually in real life city planning, we want to make cities navigable too.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this say vocabulary that has been defined by the late Mr. Lynch, who was a very very important urban planner and geographer and designer, and he actually found out what the main elements of the average human's mental map are. So, when we construct a mental map, what do we put in them when it comes to cities, at least? So, what we put in it is like the landmarks, definitely. And again, there's not just a single type of landmark. It's not just like the Eiffel Tower or the Colosseum. No, those are, let's say, objective landmarks. They're landmarks for everyone. But I know that when I'm driving towards the college I teach at, there's this specific building with a huge propeller in front of it, and it's like this maritime business thing. And I know that this is where I take a ride. So you also have a set of personal landmarks, and games should be wise enough to include those too, and have a secondary layer of distinct things that people will recognize, that people will you know uh, place in their mental maps to help them navigate. So you have like landmarks, major and secondary, and objective and subjective, and then you have paths. You have major routes and major arteries, and those things that people look out for when they are navigating a place, a city. And then you have edges, like the city walls or a waterfront, or when you're on foot, the rail lines. You cannot cross those. And then you have distinct districts, coherent, internally unified areas. You have like the old town and the factory and the industrial area and these things that are like when you are in them, you know exactly where you are. And then you have places like nodes, etc. And you have like all this theory that has also been applied to real cities that can very easily be massaged into video games, and it has been done. I'm thinking of this excellent open world racing game from several years back.
Is it Mad Max?
No. It was an urban one, like a contemporary city thing. Which I won't bore anyone by trying to remember it. But I was speaking with a person who designed it, and he was like, "Oh yeah, we absolutely used Lynch, and we absolutely used the image of the city in good urban form as guidelines for the construction of our space." And that's I mean, there are the theoretical and design tools are definitely there. Making them interesting, making them fit in is another thing, and even making a landmark successful is not as easy. I mean, you have to make certain that it works better when it's on a very, very helpful backdrop, effectively. I mean, you have the Sydney Opera House is next to the sea, so you usually see it with a huge blue thing behind it that really makes it pop out, or when it's on a hill, again you have the sky below it, or when you have relatively simple shapes that can be simplified in our minds, and when we can keep this rough outline in our head, that helps a lot. I mean, the Eiffel Tower is very simple. The Sydney Opera House is geometrically very simple, and the Leaning Tower of Pisa, very simple. Even Shinra's headquarters in Midgard, they are very easy to conceptualize and simplify our minds, and thus internalize and keep as our own. So that really helps with the power of a landmark.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and trying to, I think, as a developer, create, because as you said, it's not just about we're all plop down a tower right in the middle of a city or next to water, but making it all fit within the space is very difficult to do, or it's very hard to, I think, conceptualize, as you said, that when we look at a lot of video games, and this kind of gets back at what we were saying earlier about kind of the mechanical side versus the environmental side, that a lot of developers, and this is I think very true of open world games, or even like open world kind of like movement based games, I should say, that yes, it's cool to have like a tower next to another tower next to another tower, but how does that really fit within the space? Example of a game that I played that I really enjoyed from a movement perspective was Sunset Overdrive. This was one of the games from Insomniac. I think this was a game that kind of was their portfolio to get them to do Marvel Spider-Man. And it's a very mechanic-rich movement. Like, it feels fantastic to go from point A to point B. But I honestly can't remember, like, one thing about that world. I remember the jumping, bouncing, swinging on everything, but nothing about the actual space that we were in.
Yeah, I would say that this is primarily a writing narrative concern. I mean, think of Revachol in Disco Elysium. You see so little of it, and yet it feels so very, very vibrant, so very, very interesting, so very unique. Again, think of I would say even New Bordeaux from Mafia 3. It's this very distinct place. It has a story to tell. You can feel the history. History is very important. Cities have history. Or Kane and Lynch too. Not the best of games, but a fantastic city. I mean, it was a joy walking around. And one of the reasons you felt that it was a joy walking around was that it had history. And history hasn't stopped, because history never stops. A city never reaches a point and everyone says, okay, it's done, that's it, it's finished, it won't change anymore. That never happens. But you feel this thing that this place changes and has its mysteries and has its secrets and has its the things it wants to broadcast and show everyone. And for example, I mean, when you play Kane and Lynch 2, you play through old Shanghai, a place that effectively doesn't exist anymore as we speak, and was being destroyed during the game's development. And those, city little alleys, they give way to the, shiny skyscrapers and posh building blocks and everything. And this change makes the place interesting. Or I don't know. I'm thinking there's this fantastic montage in in Ghost in the Shell, the anime, and it's like 3 or 4 minutes of their take on Hong Kong, which is just amazing. And you see all those little vignettes that every person on screen has to tell at some point. They imply life, they imply stories, and some stories become more explicit, and this makes a place more interesting. But I would say that this is always, where we have, if we are to make, a game in generic suburbia somewhere, it would be way more demanding to turn generic suburbia into something fascinating. Whereas it would be much easier to turn, I don't know, downtown Paris into something fascinating. So it's not always easy to do. It's not always necessary to do. I mean, in a racing game, you don't really care about things. I mean, you play Need for Speed. Is the handling good? Nice. Is the racing fun? Good. That's all you need. Everything else is just, a blur background. But in some games, you really have to have quality world building effectively, which is part of, world building is part of game design or content design or narrative design. It's part of everything, but it has to be done well, and it has to be then effectively expressed via the tools of level design in the final world itself.
As a quick time check, we are just about at an hour in, so I just want to see how you're doing, as again, we are dealing with a time zone difference as well.
Yes. And I've been awake for the past, I don't know how many hours. But yeah, I'm still relatively holding up, and hopefully I'm coherent enough. I'm not certain about that, but it's more of a hope, really.
So I think
we have a bit of time more.
Okay. I would say maybe another 15-20 minutes. I think that should be good.
That's fine.
And if anyone has any questions for Konstantinos, let us know in the comments there. And
I could scroll through the comments and see if we missed anything.
I think Thomas was curious about what games you worked on.
Oh, I've worked on Lake by Gamies, which I just I mentioned, the Sinking City by Frogwares. I'm trying to think. I've worked on Armory Forger by Bohemia Interactive. A Place for the Unwilling by Alpixel. There's this pen and paper game / tool we made with Martin called Ex Novo, which is like a solo RPG / tool. It's a city creation thing. And then there's stuff that's still NDA'd, and several games that still haven't been launched yet. Include, I think I can mention Cyberganked or We Are Free Mice or Cyberpunk Cities. They should happen at some point. I've been working on a variety of games, so I think that sort of answered.
All right.
The question. And what else? There's this fantastic idea by J.M. Dukas that Only Murders in the Building, the video game, would be an amazing thing in this. This Warren Spector-esque block-like game. Yes, that would be amazing, and you wouldn't even need like this one big detailed building within society. Would be a fantastic setting if populated to that level of detail.
Now it's actually a really good segue into this next question I wanted to ask you, because one of the comments that was coming up a bit in the chat was about making the inside environments or indoor environments interesting. Because we've spent the last hour discussing open spaces, cityscapes, the land itself, the topography, with my mouth is like a dry, I can't pronounce it there. But for games that focus entirely on interior settings, I like the one that always comes to my mind would be something like Control from Remedy. When we don't have like the city itself, we don't have like this huge, like vast environment to explore. I guess, what are your thoughts, or do you have any like tips for developers if we're trying to make an office building interesting, or just one floor of a building interesting to explore?
I would say that again, just as urban planning and urban design are friends when designing cities, same way architecture is our friend and some place to steal from when designing interior space. And again, architecture is incredibly rich, and there are a shit ton of ideas to steal and mod and modify and mutate to fit into your environment. But I mean, as a minimum, we have to understand that each space should have, actually not should have, each space has a function, and this function is the first part that dictates its form. And it would be stupid to have a very ornate, beautiful, and impressive corridor in this back office IT building in an industrial park outside Kent in England. You won't have that. It would make no sense. But you would have a very impressive corridor, I don't know, in Apple's headquarters, probably, because you would want it to be impressive. So when you design an interior space, you have to understand what this place is supposed to do, who's it for, and how is this conveyed. I mean, oh come on, this fantastic game that has you as an office worker actually stand up, the Stanley Parable. Thank you, I remember that. Yeah, I mean, the Stanley Parable wouldn't make sense in any other environment. And it's exactly this mundanity of the environment that makes it such a unique experience. Also the writing, obviously, and the game design and the narrative design. Anyway, yeah, it's a great game. But I mean, you have to realize what style works for you. I mean, in Control, you have this like very modernist take on brutalism, and you have the naked concrete and the very clean shapes of modernity, and this works. You have this very strong style that is repeated throughout the game, and then you can use simple. I mean, I always have it by me. It's actually here. It's because I've been looking at something. It's like this little thing, the 101 things I learned in architecture school. It's a small book by Matthew Frederick, and I think it's published by the MIT Press. Yes. And it's packed with little ideas, little tips, and level design is effectively architecture simplified and applied to virtual worlds when it comes to interior spaces. Again, you have to think narratively if you want to add something. I mean, how are you going to decorate the place? What stories will the decorations tell? How long is it? How do you have a succession, of narrow spaces and wide spaces, of dark and well lit places? I mean, you have there was this. I think it's been demolished right now, and I obviously cannot remember stuff because it's too late for me to remember anything. There was this hotel in Chicago during the 30s, and it had a place called the Jesus Hall. And it was the place that you entered right after going through a short corridor, a revolving door, and you went into the place that was so impressive that everyone entered and said, "Oh, Jesus." And the place was dubbed the Jesus Hall just because everyone said, "Oh, Jesus," when they entered it, because it was so incredibly impressive. And that was, a thoroughly architectural effect. But you have to know what you want to do. I mean, and you have to arrange everything in order to achieve the desired effect. For example, I mean, the Parthenon here in Athens is meant to be seen from all angles. So when you enter the Acropolis, you will go to the left of the temple, and then you are forced to move behind it, and then come to its right, and then till you reach the front door where you can enter it. So I mean, the whole architecture of the thing, the whole arrangement has been really thought over and then expressed in space. And the same thing can be done, obviously in virtual space.
Mm-hmm. And trying to, again, like, give it that sense of purpose. That, again, is where I think a lot of developers tend to mess up, especially if it's their first time building either an indoor or outdoor environment. I recently tried a Souls-like, what was it, the Last Hero of Nostalgia Gala, or something like that. It was like kind of like a rip off of like old school like adventure games and stuff like that.
Right.
And it has that issue where everything feels loaded out. Like it's like, here's an inn. Here's the front of the inn, the back of the inn. It's like 60 feet to walk from one end to the other. Like it just feels like, again, like going back to a point I said earlier, it feels like it's space just for the sense of space. And to something that you said about how you want games to respect your time more, I think this is where we kind of see what modern design, or what I think the modern audience wants out of their games. They don't want to spend 10 hours just simply walking from, interesting point A to interesting point B. They want to be doing what's at these interesting points. And
exactly.
Yeah, and it's just becoming, I think, for a lot of developers, that space is kind of the enemy. If you're just putting it in, just as you said earlier, just to check off that marketing box that, hey, it takes 40 minutes to explore, it's automatically an open world game.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. But also, I mean, there's also the matter of artistry. I mean, I'm thinking, because as you were talking, I actually again remember that. I mean, I also want movies and TV series and everything to respect my time. I don't want them to feel bloated. I mean, I adored the latest Stranger Things season, but it could have taken up exactly half the time. You didn't need like 3-hour episodes. I mean, God, it's far too large. It's far too large. I mean, as I was watching it, I was editing the thing in my mind. But that does not mean that length itself is something that will damn or praise a work. I mean, you can make a 4-hour movie about samurais, but if you're Kurosawa, it's gonna be a masterpiece. If you're me, it's gonna be mediocre. So obviously, if you can do something wonderful, and if you can make those extra 60 yards worth the walk, good, do it. Fantastic. If you have something to tell, some sentiment to impose, some idea to share, something stunning to bestow upon us, whatever, good, do it. But if you really just add space and add stuff for the sake of checking boxes and claiming that you have this huge variety of things, don't. I mean, everything has to have a purpose. I mean, design-wise too. You want a city, good. Why do you want a city? You want the interiors to be visitable, good. Which ones? And can you handle more than 20 interiors? 20 interiors sound too many to me. I mean, you have to really, and this is perhaps a collective effort, or the design team's job to do well. But everything has to have a purpose. Everything has to do work. It's like, I don't know, in literature, every word has to do something. It has to support an idea. It has to challenge something. It has to do some sort of work. It can't just be there. You don't want to have 15 adjectives and 20 adverbs with every description. You don't want countless metaphors and similes and shit. You want things to be pithy and meaningful.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and again, like, it's that challenge when it comes to a lot of, I think, first-time or indie developers, where they feel like they need to make it that big. They need to. It can't just be, I take like a 1 minute or even a 30-second walk from here to there. No, we have to make it a 20-minute to an hour long, little hike. And like we said earlier, like, you can have that space if it's worth going into that space, whether it's because, hey, there's all these crazy lights and you see this beautiful stuff, or it's just enjoyable to move around. And I've kind of reached this point that if you make me have to walk a long distance and there's not a dedicated run button or an increased speed,
Oh yeah.
I have to ding your game for it now.
Yeah. Okay, seriously, the lack of the lack of run buttons is criminal. I mean, always I don't get it. Really, I mean, I don't get why it's not the default. And you have like super extra fast run for everything else. I mean, it's honestly, people are saturated with stuff to look at and play with. Everything we can hope to engage them with has to be unique, has to be compact, does not have to. I mean, okay, imagine there's obviously this large demographic of, I don't know, school kids. And school kids, on average, have way more time than we do. But right now, I mean, if I told you just like this is a fantastic game, but you will need 50 hours for it. I mean, what are the chances you would say, good, I'll spend time with that? I mean, for me, it's just like impossible.
Yeah. And the other thing that like really drives me crazy is when the game dictates when you can run or walk. And I recently tried that game, Somerville, that just came out. I think it just was released this past week, and it was that case where all of a sudden the character can't run, so we have to slow walk through the building to then be able to run again.
No, seriously, that's. I mean, it sounds irritating, let alone experiencing it. I wouldn't like to. I mean, there's certainly one of those quality of life things that are pretty important when it comes to, effective entertainment. Entertainment can be artful, it can be art, it can be all sorts of things, but it has to be entertaining, or at least, I don't know, engaging. Let's not stick to fun, but it has to be engaging. It's very easy to lose us.
Yep, definitely. I can rant and rave about that for a few hours easily. I guess with that said, I have one last, I think, big question for you. And again, we could sit here and chat for several more hours if we really wanted to do here. Let me see here. And like YouTube is giving me all kinds of weird alerts about the stream. 1 second. It will stabilize. I will have to double check my internet after this is over, just simply because it was working perfectly as I was starting it. Make sure it stabilizes here.
I don't know. Our chat seems super stable to me.
Yeah.
I don't know how YouTube is doing.
Yeah. All right, there we go. So I think the last question, and as I've said, we can certainly ramble on all about this. But one of the big games, obviously, I know you haven't had a chance to play Elden Ring, but I wanted to at least touch on some of the aspects of it that I think kind of resonate with so many people. And the one thing that I want to get your thoughts on, and again, this I think goes really well with urban design and environmental design, is I think creating a space that I think rewards exploration in the sense that a lot of people were, when Elden Ring blew up earlier this year, one of the more common things that people were making fun of, not so much on that game, but on open world design in general, is the idea of most open world games, people see it as just a map of stuff. You turn on the map in Assassin's Creed, or Marvel Spider-Man, or pick any AAA game, and it's just like, here's 75 different things you can do at any given point. Elden Ring, and what I think made a lot of people celebrate it, was that it was just, okay, here's this big space. Maybe there's a castle over here. Maybe there's some crazy cave over here, but it kind of got out of its own way. And in a way, it felt less like a game, or less like that checklist of things, and more of just, here's this world, go. And I wanted to just get your thoughts on, is that, like, how do you, or can you design around that? That idea of, we're not going to tell the player, you must go here, here, here. You need to do 10 fishing quests and 5 hunts, and we need to kill 3 bad guys. Just, here's a space, do whatever you want.
I would say that nowadays those are the only, or almost the only open worlds that interest me. I mean, knowing now that Elden Ring is like that is something that's a big plus on my book. The thing is that yes, those checklists and the fact that even at excellent games such as The Witcher, or interesting architecturally and urbanistically games such as the Syndicate games, that you have those like this map lighting up with exclamation marks and question marks and little icons and everything. Yes, it does feel like a checklist. It does feel like a thing you have to slug through, and this is not something you would do in real world. Whereas, from what I get, Elden Ring gives you vague, probably suggestions on what should be done, and lets you discover the world and lets the world surprise you and perhaps subtly guide you. Because I mean, you can obviously very easily guide people. I mean, I had a student whose thesis was conveying stories very in a very measurable way through environmental design, and he used all sorts of little techniques and tricks to very precisely guide players in an open world. And that's definitely doable, and I can imagine that just as Breath of the Wild does that, because Breath of the Wild actually does a similar thing. I mean, you don't have anything on the map. You just have, the point of where you are and the map. And you just look at it and try to imagine where the interesting things or where the useful things are, and just go there. And that is way more interesting because it constantly surprises us with you don't know what to expect. As you said, you don't know what will be below that chasm, or behind that mountain or whatever. So this makes exploration itself interesting, because when you have the checklist on the map, you know that between the points there's nothing of interest. You know that, okay, maybe you have points and random encounter space. That's it. And you were very good at discerning patterns, let alone such obvious ones. And when we discern patterns and really understand them, after a point, we get bored. We want new patterns. We want things that we not realize. Whereas when I get to understand that those mountains tend to attract those kinds of birds that tend to live in those types of caves, and that some of those caves are interconnected, this is an interesting thing. Or just moving from cave A to cave B with a chance of bird attack in the middle is just dull.
Yeah, and when you do get a chance to play on it, I'm very curious to hear what your thoughts on it, because it is.
You actually got me intrigued.
Because it really did, I think, for a lot of people, just really took them for a loop in terms of, again, presenting that game space that just kind of is a counter to what we see from a lot of AAA studios. And I think it takes a level of confidence with a developer in order to present it at that stage. Because again, I think for a lot of new developers, they may take the wrong lessons that, hey, let's just make it super wide, super confusing. The player has no idea if or where anything is, and we'll make that a mystery. But again, it doesn't, I think, lead to it being engaging.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It's not that getting lost can be fun in specific scenarios, but yeah, it's just that too much of anything takes away any value. I mean, if you have too much of anything, it's just dull. It's just pointless. You have to guide. You have to. I mean, you're the designer, let's say, so you have to know what's fun, what's interesting, what's worth seeing in your game, and you have to make certain that those things are really showcased. That those things are easy to find. That those things are not lost in an ocean of meaningless stuff.
But I think with that, we could sit here and just ramble for hours. I know we're about an hour and 20 in, So we can probably wrap things up, or at least start to, unless anyone has any questions. So I guess any points about urban design, environmental design, open world design that we didn't touch on that you'd like to bring up?
Trying to think of something. No, I think that one of the more interesting discussions right now is whether everything has to be an open world, and maybe people are indeed starting to get tired of those AAA checklists that everyone is trying to replicate. Open world and crafting, for example. They don't have to be in each and every game. They do not. If they do not add something, they shouldn't be there. And I would say that experimenting with Yakuza-like, very very condensed, that is, open worlds might be more interesting, more intriguing. Or maybe doing larger stuff with a greater level of abstraction that would allow us to make more unique things with less assets, less work. This level of abstraction, for example, that Vice City had, that would be an interesting thing to play with again. uh, but yeah, I think we've more or less covered everything that I can think of. I mean, it's almost midnight here, so it's the things I can think of are relatively reduced. But yeah, I think we sort of covered the basics, let's say.
All right. Yeah, but hopefully it's been stable for the people watching. Just because I've been noticing like OBS has been going up and down. I'm
Okay.
hoping that it's just YouTube or OBS being weird. My Comcast related issues having to come back to haunt me. But yeah, I think to your final point, not everything needs to be open world design. Even if you are trying to build like a narrative driven game, it's important to think about what the player is actually doing.
Mm.
And does the world serve that gameplay loop? And like some games can get away with that. Stuff like what was it? What Remains of Edith Finch, Gone
Mm.
Home, where yes, you're exploring a generally you're moving around very slowly in that space, but there's just a lot to take in. Whereas there are some games that, like the Saints Row games, where it's a giant space and you're moving, you're super jumping, flying, and all that. But it just feels like the whole environment just kind of disappears at that point. It's just there as some place for you to shoot or throw a car at
Yeah.
someone.
Yeah. True. No, I do completely agree with that. And also, I was also reminded of Thief, the especially the first Thief games, where you were forced to move silently and slowly, and this actually made you pay more attention to the environment around you, and the fact wood sounded differently than stone when stepped on, or that shadows mattered and everything. This made you really slow down to take in every detail, and that helped with immersion and everything. So I mean, again, the pace and speed of a game has to be um, say in harmony with the environment and in
Mm-hmm.
harmony with the gameplay and everything. But that would be opening up a new huge huge new discussion on pace and the probability of things and environments, and yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I think with that we can wrap things up for today. For the people watching, there's live or recorded. Do you have any upcoming projects or anything you would like to tease?
I'm working on the pre-production of a game with a studio, and I think I can I can say nothing for the moment, but we will be going into production hopefully January, and then I'll be able to start sharing things. It's I mean, I'm not so much as a gamer, but still there is a definite civic element to the game, but mostly as the game designer of the thing, and it's gonna be slightly different from most of the things I've worked on, and yeah, that's one thing. And we're seeing where to take Ex Novo next with Martin, because it's been doing very well as a board game. /RPG/tool. And I think no, those are the two major new things I'm working on.
All right. I just thought of one other quick question, just like Paul, I just want to get your thoughts on this really fast. What do you think about a lot of the kind of, I'm not sure if we have a genre description for, like, casual city builders, stuff like, was it Dwarf Romantic?
Yeah,
there's a few
beautiful
other
game,
ones.
but I mean, beautiful aesthetically. I'm not too fascinated by that. I mean, I liked it. I like good idea. I prefer the one where you just build the town. Where you just had like this tool-like thing, the Townscaper.
Okay.
I mean, that was fun, but I mean, those simple mechanics and those huge abstractions of the systems of cities, especially towards the more cutesy thing. I mean, they're very well done. I just don't find them very appealing. I mean, in a city simulation, I would prefer something more involved, more detailed, and less toy-like, perhaps. But it's fun. They're absolutely interesting games, and they definitely look fantastic.
Right. So, I think with that, let's wrap things up for the episode and let you get some sleep, because I know it's getting late there. So, if people want to follow you on Twitter, social media, anything like that, do you have any really good links or stuff?
I have the Gnomesler handle at Twitter, which is my main social media thing, provided Twitter survives. Other than that, I've started opening accounts here and there, from Mastodon to Instagram, which I really can't wrap my mind around. But hopefully Twitter will be more or less okay, and so that's the main social media thing. And then I've got my site, which is game./it/is.com, which is, I can just put it in the chat. This is where it's like a portfolio / game urbanism site. And yeah, everything is linked to from there too. So that's where people can get in touch or find me.
All right. And hopefully the stream and everything is still good. Again, I've been noticing some weird irregularities. For the people watching this recorded, they won't get any of that annoying stuff, hopefully. So,
Good.
I'll include, like, whenever you have a chance, anywhere you like me to link back to, feel free to just, like, message me with them, and I'll post them in the recorded version. But, yeah, it has been great hanging out with you, and hopefully we can we'll do another one in the future.
Oh, yes. So once again, I would absolutely love to, and seriously, super fun and super interesting, and thanks for having me, and yep, hope to do this again at some point.
So, with that said, everyone, we're going to wrap things up for the episode. For anyone still watching, thank you for tuning in. Do the liking, subscribing, and commenting. Check out our Discord and Patreon link down below, as well as links to all my books and that great stuff. You can follow me on Twitter for however long that may still be good, and join the Discord as well. So if you are over working on an upcoming game, or just want to talk shop, and are interested in coming on, please reach out. Again, message me anywhere, and I'll be happy to respond. But with that said, everybody, have a great rest of your afternoon. Come back for daily discussions on game design here, and on game wisdom, where is in the art and science of games. And until next time, take care.